And welcome to the Grid Snaps podcast, the premier game development and design podcast. I'm here in the new Grid Snaps studio, live in Indiana. You are in your new Grid Snaps studio, still in lovely Seattle, but you recently moved as well. We both moved within the city, in city moves, in town moves. You can still see I have the room divider because I'm still in, where are we at now? We're about 13 days, no, not 13 days, that's, I'm insane. I'm about a week, that's right, a week since we started sleeping in this house. We started moving about 4 or 5 days before, and then we started actually living in the house, about a week ago. And
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great. But we're in that stage now where, and you know how it is. We went and spent all the monies at IKEA, and that reminds me, we have an episode about IKEA, about how it's laid out with real life level designs. I actually kept one of our most popular episodes. Did you know that? Our real life IKEA level design episode is greatly loved by the audience. So what I would say is, if you like that episode, and if you like this episode, and you like what we're doing, what should they do, Kip?
They should like or subscribe, hit the notification bell, write in the comments what you'd like to see next.
Yes, that's right. And we did get some great feedback on the series we've been doing, which is what we're here to do again, the game dev from soup to nuts. So thank you for that feedback. We love when we get feedback. It's great. But yeah, you should write a positive review, 5-star review on iTunes.
No negative reviews.
On Google Play. Yeah, no negativity here. On Google Play, on
I thought we were talking about Crunch today.
No. And all your favorite podcasting services, and on YouTube, like Kip referred to, subscribe on YouTube. It's on the Rojo Games YouTube channel. Where
all fine podcasts are served.
Yeah, so definitely check it out there. So again, please do us a solid if you'd like to. So, all right, well, Game Dev Soup to Nuts, from Soup to Nuts. The last episode that we did on this, we were talking about production. And just to recap everything, we started with the green light phase, getting anyone to give you money at all, then pre-production, then production. Now, one thing I didn't want to do is get too romantic about this and be like, well, yeah, we do production and it goes great and there's no problems and we just finish the game, right? And if I was going to be idealistic about it, would go, the next episode would be like on Lot Check or on,
After
whatever
Party.
Right, yeah. It would be fruity drinks time. You finish the game. Unfortunately, we don't want to be idealistic. We want to be realistic here. So what we have to talk about now is, of course, crunch.
The crunch. Crunch.
Kip, what we should start with is just a definition, of what crunch is, because people are listening, especially if they're not industry people, and they're like, what are they talking about? Are they actually putting one of those car compactors at a junkyard? I think Heavy Rain had a scenario where you were stuck in a car that's about to get compacted, and you had to do all these quick time events to escape.
Yeah.
I failed.
That's what it feels like.
And that character permanently dies then in the story if you can't successfully navigate that. And that's kind of when I stopped playing Heavy Rain, because I got frustrated about that. Actually, I completed Heavy Rain. I did complete it. But that part frustrated me because I liked that character. But yeah, crunch it's basically just unpaid overtime. Most of the time it's unpaid in the video game industry, where you're asked to work beyond 40 hours a week on a game. And it could be, you could be spending 10 hours a day, 12, 14. You could be asked to work weekends, Saturdays, Sundays, that sort of thing. Now, Kit, one thing I was thinking about is, I don't want to treat us like we're special. The fact of the matter is, other industries have this notion of overtime, right? We're not the only industry that has overtime. But the difference is that, I'm pretty sure that if you're in, the UAW, United Auto Workers, you're working for Ford, I have a lot of family in that field on my wife's side of the family, Michiganders, a lot of them work for Ford. and they get paid extra for this, so you don't really hear you don't really see articles about like, oh, the workers making the new Ford Explorer had to put in all this overtime. Maybe they did, but they're getting a little juice for that. They're getting time and a half for that, baby. They're getting they're getting they're getting their just desserts. Have an enthusiast industry of people. It inspires enthusiast press that you don't get for making cars, right? There's no Kotaku for auto manufacturing, right? I guess there is like Jalopnik or whatever, but it's a completely different scene, like a completely different like type of coverage, right? You're not getting like, for instance, look, I mean, The Last of Us 2 came out and there was a lot of coverage about crunch at Naughty Dog, for instance, right? You don't hear that in the media about auto manufacturers, or even like Intel. Do they crunch their employees and they make microchips? Maybe, I don't know. Like, we'd never hear about it. If it's because it's an enthusiast industry and people are just really hungry for information about it, and one of those things are so that's like something that will get a website clicks, is talking about a famous developer that had to crunch their employees, that gets clicks, right? So
every developer.
The point I'm making is that crunch gets a lot of coverage, but it does occur. This notion of simply having to work beyond 40 hours is not unique, to us. It really is not, right? And then you think about being a college professor like I am now. It's like, that's kind of another weird ball of wax. I mean, I'm in this thing now, this summer thing. I mean, I do get summers off, but then you're asked to participate in projects, and you are paid extra, for that. But what ends up happening is like, because of the nature of summer work, it's like it's not the type of work where it's like, well, you show up to your office and you work from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m. and then you're done. No, they tend to be projects where you're sort of on call all the time. And especially with the pandemic and everything being remote, mostly, that even increases that, because I'm not even going to an office. So I'm kind of like, when you're a professor, lots of things are like that, where it's not 9 to 5. You're sort of always on call. You have meetings at weird times. And so even though you get all this time off, like summers and holidays, yes, you do get that. It's a different kind of schedule. It's its own particular challenge, and you can have your own kind of crunch, I think, when you have like a bunch of things pile up out of nowhere, and days kind of get upended. Because there's very little with the college teaching. There's actually a even less predictability than the game industry has in terms of what you're going to be doing each day. When you get up. So. All right, well, we've pounded that into the dirt. I think we all understand what crunch is at this point. So I think what we should do now is talk about sort of what I like to call kind of myths about crunch, like things that people may think it is and what it really is. And it's okay if we can have different opinions. And I know, Kip, you have a couple of questions to ask me later about crunch. But I thought it'd be good to kind of establish some baselines about what video game industry crunch is and is not. So, all right. The first thing I wanted to bring up with this is, if you read books like Masters of Doom, which is a great book, really cool book about like 3D realms and Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake and id Software and all that. I'm going to turn off this extra light because it is not necessary in this room. Okay, yeah. So yeah, you read that book and you read other literature from what I call the Wild West era of game development from the 1990s. You heard a lot about crunch, but they were trying to make the game amazing, right? We would call this feature creep, if you want to actually use like a proper industry term, right? You're excited, you're trying to add new things, but it blows up the schedule because it takes a lot of time to add those new things. And I think a lot of lay persons, they think that feature creep, even if they don't know it's feature creep, they think that's what's happening with crunch a lot of the time, right? And that may have been true in the 1990s, but unfortunately I'm here to tell you that's not really, at least in my career, how crunch happens. It's certainly not because we were trying to make the game so awesome that we were just jamming so much coolness in the game that we got derailed.
Hey, we were just trying to make the game.
Right, yeah.
Sometimes.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen anymore at all, but I think that's actually pretty rare now. I think that was a byproduct of Wild West game development of the 1990s, particularly PC game development in America, especially, where you had, id Software. They started, actually, a lot of people don't realize they actually were in Madison, Wisconsin for a while, which is kind of Raven kind of sprouted from them. And they were moonlighting at first, right? Which is crunch by default, right? They're working for a company, and then they were working on their own games after their day job. So that's like crunch by default, at that point, right? But then later on, it was just they had, yes, they were writing design documents and trying to, do what they could to be official, but it was a lot more wild, a lot more like 11th hour, we're going to add this cool thing, we're going to like scrap the engine and make a new one, like Crazy Town stuff that would just never happen now. Unfortunately, crunch now tends to happen, I would say, on the developer side. And Kip, you can say if you agree with this, it's usually on the developer side, it's a lack of planning acumen that causes it mostly. Would you agree with that?
Yes. It's I've experienced crunch where there's many different types of crunch. There's self-imposed crunch. There's like a culture of self-imposed crunch. There's actual crunch. And I guess there's the various forms of that of, hey, we're trying to make the game, and the feature creep of just, hey, we're trying to add all these awesome things. So it kind of comes in many different forms. I think.
Right. So I think, on the developer side, if it's our fault, right, on our side, it's usually just we didn't plan well, and there's all kinds of downstream things, and we can dig into what those are a little bit, but just to stay real high level at first, I think a lot of times crunch happens because it's from the publisher. And here's the thing, actually, let's talk about this, because this is pretty like basic stuff that people should know. There's this production triangle concept, right?
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah, but it's so simple but so wise, I think, where the idea is that each point of the triangle represents, one point represents quality, one point represents speed, and the other point represents cost. And the idea is you can have 2 out of 3 on any project, but you can't have all 3. If something, for instance, like we would say that Red Dead Redemption 2 did not have speed. It took them a long time to make it. But but they had very high quality, right? So
it's very expensive.
Now,
I'm sure of it.
Right. It was also very expensive. They only had one thing in that case they only had one, which was high quality. It was really
high quality and expense.
Yeah.
Right?
If we're looking at the triangle as in like with the speed thing, I think we're looking at that as, can you get it done fast relative to how long it normally takes to get a project of that size out the door, right? I think, that's subjective, obviously. Maybe RDR2 was exactly on time. It's hard to say. But so some of these things are subjective, but that one for sure, very high quality. But they didn't get it at a cheap price, right? So that's one point they're not getting, for sure. Whereas, like, an Earth Defense Force game, whether it's the Japanese ones or the games that the game that we made in America, it's like, okay, we definitely got, speed. We did it quickly, and we did it inexpensively. But you are going to take some hits in quality. Now, does the quality affect the gameplay? Does it make the game actually less fun? I would argue for like EDF games, especially the Japanese ones, but really all of them, I don't think it actually does. So just because you fail on one of the points of the production triangle doesn't mean that the game is bad. Okay, it just means it's really hard to have all those things together, right? And so when it comes to the publisher side, the thing that you have to remember, I think, about crunch, Kip, is that if you simply had infinite time, there would never be crunch, right? Like if you ran into problems like, oh no, the Unreal Engine blew up and we have to wait for Epic Games to roll out another version that supported this ambient lighting thing we're doing, but that's not coming for like 6 weeks, so we have to be idled for
Wait,
six weeks.
you mean 4.251?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's wait. We gotta edit that one out for sure. No, we don't. We'll leave that one in.
Yeah. So anyway, like, if you were always just granted more time, then you would never
Mm-hmm.
need crunch would never happen. Projects would
Yeah.
just extend. And look, some studios do this. Like Nintendo famously says, at least with their, I don't know if that was true when they were working with you at Retro Studios, Kit, but like in terms of what they always say about their internal stuff in Japan, that they always say, well, a game that's delayed, what is it? There's a Miyamoto quote that's really famous where he says, well, a game that's delayed, takes longer, but it'll still be good. But if you release a game before it's ready and it's bad forever, right? That's a famous Miyamoto
I will
quote.
say I won't give any divulge any secrets, but yes, I believe that is a core tenet they hold, and it shows that like they would that. I guess if you're going to talk about crunches, that would be a scenario. There, I don't think there was a desperate crunch, but there was, like, they did hold that to be one of their values, which I thought was very good. And they kind of knew, like, hey, if this has a little bit more time to percolate and we do it the right way, we're going to get a much better product out of it. And sure enough, they're right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, and so that's something Nintendo's very famous for, and you don't actually hear a lot about crunching at their studios in Japan, or even like Next Level Games in Canada. Or it sounds like that wasn't a thing that happened a lot at Retro Kip when you were there.
no,
Yeah,
I mean, there was kind of like towards the end, they were like, people were staying, but that was more like if we had to get a particular build out, some of like the key stakeholders, like leads, would kind of stay and ensure that. But it wasn't. People were. I mean, I guess that was sort of like that was like my youngest time in the games industry. So it was sort of like, yeehaw, we're making video games. This is so great. And
I would
so
hope
people are.
you still feel that way a tiny bit though, right? Like, yeehaw, we're making
Uh,
video games, right?
well, I mean, I think there was sort of like particularly with that art team, we were all trying to. It was like a competitive creativeness, and we're all trying to like one up each other and do better. So, sometimes you'd crunch just to do something better, just to like kind of push things, push it. That was sort of, I guess, wasn't like necessarily feature creep, but you wanted to do a really good job on it, so you would stay late, or we didn't really hold technically. We were all like super young devs, so there was no families or anything like that. We really had no ties to the outside world, so we could do that sort of thing pretty easily.
And by the way, that's something I should talk about too. To further define what we're talking about in terms of crunch, we're really talking about mandatory, where your bosses are saying to you, you have to be here.
Like,
Or
it's like
else
there's
you're
usually
gonna
like
get
a
fired.
meeting, like, hey,
Yeah.
can we just meet like real quick in the conference room? We're gonna go talk about some stuff, and I'd like you to be there. Usually, and if it's good if it's the whole group too, then
Right.
you're not getting fired. That
Because
may you're
sometimes
just
that happens when you're getting laid off, right? So
there's a meeting I'd like you to get to. I'd like you to really be there. That's the bad meeting. Don't go
right.
to that one.
Yeah. Just don't should be like that character in Office Space where you just kind of keep
Just
showing
don't
up
show up.
anyway, and they and duck out of those meetings, and they'll just keep paying you by mistake. Actually, they when that happens, it's because they have no money, so that won't happen like an Office Space. But no, we don't mean like when we talk about crunch, we're really not talking about. There's a lot of voluntary crunch, I guess you can say.
That's sort of, I guess, like where I was kind of mentioning that before, where like some of that is sort of embedded in the studio sometimes, which I could see kind of at, there's a couple particular, usual suspects that's very much the culture where people are, you may say like, oh, we only do 40-hour weeks, but there's 40 hours of meetings, but then the rest you need to do 80 hours to just do, your 40 hours of stuff.
There's something that one of my great game dev mentors, Nathan Cheever, he's been on this podcast, by the way, wonderful Prey 2 podcast. He said this when I was working with him at Human Head, and it definitely opened my eyes, kind of to my naivete, right? Because I was still fairly young at that point, where it's like, your thinking is, look, I'm going to get in this industry, and I'm going to outwork everybody. And because I outwork everybody, I'm going to get all the money and all the bonuses and all the, I'm going to like get promoted, like, and you're really, at the schools, they will sell you that narrative too, if you want it. That narrative is there. There's a guy, and he's very good, and actually he's a great dude, and very helpful, has been very helpful to me, and like runs a studio now, in, I think, Santa Monica or something. His name's Drew Murray, and he graduated from my school, and he had this amazing tale where he came to Insomniac and busted his tail and was made like a senior like in 3 years, and was a creative director a few years after that. And so obviously there's this notion, and I don't want to give the wrong idea. I'm a believer in hustle and hard work, and I'm a big believer in that, so please don't get me wrong. But there's something that Nathan Cheever said to me, where he's like, he kind of, just as a lighthearted reference to some earlier point in his career, he mentioned, oh, well, back when I was working 16-hour days thinking I'd get a new car. He said that jokingly, right? Like, oh. And the inference I caught from that is, just simply being there all the dang time doesn't mean that you get promoted, doesn't mean that you win the prizes, so to speak. There's a lot more to it than just spending lots and lots of time, right? You have to be making, like, I worked with a fellow once, and who did an awesome job, but I remember, like, he would like count how many bugs was being fixed, kind of keep count, right? Score. And I just remember thinking, at this point I was kind of at the senior level at this point, so I was thinking to myself, he would just tackle all these bugs, and they were just like, there were bugs and they needed to be fixed, but they were like, not terribly complicated, and he was just like, I can just tell, thinking, yeah, this is I'm gonna get a new car from this. I don't know if it was literally a new car, but you know what I mean? Like, you can just feel the ambition. Like, you're
just gonna get more work, dummy.
That's it. That's it. And I remember just smiling at myself, thinking, go ahead, because what I had to learn the hard way, and what a lot of people have to learn the hard way, is that, I'm sorry, you don't actually get promoted and get huge increases in salary just because you fixed a bunch of C-level bugs on a project that were probably going to get fixed by someone else anyway. You
got to do a lot more brown nosing than that, I'll tell you what.
See, I knew you were going to go there, and you're not entirely wrong, but I'm going to be more optimistic.
No, you do. No, I want the listeners to know that you do need to work hard, right? You're not going to get anywhere if you don't work hard. So
but you have to work
I'm not
smart
saying like
shirk
your duties. Yeah,
it's not.
So this.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was just gonna say it's. I'm really happy that individual cranked out and did all that. That was great. That was awesome. But like, if you have this notion that kind of at the end of a project that you're gonna turn in a scoreboard of like, look, person B pushed 20 crates around and I pushed 50 crates around. Well, but what if person B, like,
boss gonna say, how come you didn't push 100 crates around? That's what they're gonna say.
What if person B designed a system that made the crate pushing automated, right? Like, you know what I mean? There's this working smarter and making big impacts versus just like, it's not just how many work tickets you turn in, right? Yeah. It's just not. It's as simple as that.
There's always those people that they everything they do, they're kind of, it's there's like a Ben Franklin quote or something. You're like pushing the apple cart or pushing the wheelbarrow around town,
right?
Showing everybody how much work you've done, which you need to do that a little bit. Like, hey, look at me, I'm a go-getter. I'm doing a lot of stuff. Especially if you are working hard and you are burning the midnight oil, you should let everybody know that. Like, I mean, there's obviously the people that are like sending emails super late at night, like, look at all this work I'm doing.
Yes.
My God, it's just amazing. I'm just a tour de force of
and the other thing is that,
dev.
like, and this is one of the problems to get kind of back to crunch, I guess, because what we're kind of talking about now is kind of the self-imposed crunch that people do.
Yeah.
Like go-getters. You see this a lot in younger folks in the industry. Now, on the other hand, look, let me also...
You do got to earn your stripes, right? You do got to earn your stripes. So I think a lot of people nowadays, they don't do that. They kind of, they're like, oh, I'm going to apply for the senior artist position straight out of school or something. And you're like, it would be unfathomable in my day. It would be like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Here's the thing. Like, I think the balanced perspective that we're trying to give here is that, like, you have to work hard, but you have to work smart also. And that it's okay to be like, look, like, because the two ends of the extreme, I think, are this. There's that person that's just there, like, 16, 17 hours, and honestly, the quality of work can't possibly be that good when you
you can't maintain that. You can't do anything that's like, I mean, you're just hitting buttons and you're there to impress the execs, basically, at that point.
We have a finite amount of energy we can give. And there is this notion of finishing moves that I'll remind me to talk about that later. There are times where you have to really step on the gas, but it can't be all the time. But conversely, and this is where I might get in trouble with the current game development culture a little bit by saying this. Like, I do think there is something to be said.
Say it.
That nothing great was made at a 40-hour work week schedule, like, strictly. I think if, I just think the game industry, if you are strictly 9 to 5, like, always 9 to 5, like, you get there and as soon as that eighth hour elapses, you're like, boom, through the door. I mean, that's, I don't know. Like, I can't get down with that either. I mean, in terms of this thing we're talking about now in personal crunch, like, look, I'm always willing to spend a little extra time if I'm in the zone. Like, I'm not going to just, like, and it doesn't matter if it's like lectures at Purdue, if it's like helping students out with stuff, if it's getting, when I was working in industry, if it's like, if I was just really in the flow state working on levels or whatever, I'm not going to feel like I'm, a terrible person if I work a few extra hours voluntarily because I'm just in the zone. Sometimes you are.
Yeah.
And that's what you want. But on the other hand, I think making a habit of that is unnecessary.
That's where it gets dangerous, because you can get burned out. You can get burned out really quick, and then your creativity is down in the toilet. And so, I mean, it's just like, redlining an engine of a car, right? You can do it a little bit.
Right.
You can't do it every time you drive the car. And, you got to repair it. You got to maintain it. You can't abuse it. But, it's like a high performance vehicle. You could push it to its limit. It's meant to do that, but not all the time.
So
does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And now that we've kind of totally exhausted this idea of personal voluntary crunch, we were talking about crunch on the publisher side, which I don't think we've definitively answered. So I'll just jump right in and answer that. Usually that's when, because I got distracted with the production triangle and all that, when crunch happens on the production side from the publisher side, I should say, it's usually because they have a date they have to hold to. And that's like what I said before. If they could just keep extending...
This is when the publisher is like, hey, guess what? We need game 2 months early. Or something like that. Or there's like some sort of... hey, guess what? E3's coming up. We need a demo for it. And then
right, they're going to do, or they may demand significant changes to the game, to the game design, which completely upends the schedule, but they're not willing to kick out the release date to compensate for that. Because again, I can't stress this enough. If you just had the ability to extend the date, no one would ever crunch, because you would just delay it again and again and again, whatever. But that's just not going to happen, right? Sometimes things just have to get done for various reasons. Like it could be I know on Lost Within we desperately wanted to hit the Christmas window and we missed it, and I think that really did damage our chances of selling a lot, because that was coming out on Fire tablets and iOS devices, and the idea is that everyone gets these at Christmas and they get gift cards that like e-bucks to go into the store, right, and download games. And we would have, because it was Amazon Game Studios, we would have had, we would have been right on the front page on Christmas morning when they get their new shiny device to go and spend a gift card in. We would have been right there, but we missed that, right? And that was because of something that happened in the engine that we were using that blew up and it pushed it out. But sometimes publishers will you have to hit a certain date. It could also be in the case of some of the port projects I've been involved in, when all the other games are coming out on all the other systems, you have to hit the same date they do. So there's a lot of things, and not all of them are like evil publisher things. Some of them are just unfortunate things that have to happen, and you just grit and bear it and do your best. So
I've been on that where that's happened, where like the scope of the project has significantly increased and the deadline is actually it's like, well, actually we need it sooner, and so you really have to make a lot of concessions of like what your game is, and like maybe it's not what it started out to be,
right?
And that's tough. That's a real pickle in there, and that's not fun.
Right. So at this point, let's transition to this. Let's talk about our own personal crunch experiences now that we've defined what crunch is.
These are sort of where my questions. So I have 3 questions. The first 2, and then the next one after the end. Answer me these questions 3.
This will be great. Fire away, Kip. Interview me.
Okay. What was your worst crunch experience, Rob Howard?
I would say, on the whole, my worst crunch experience was probably BioShock Infinite, because it was the longest. And because of one of the things about involuntary crunch, where again the idea is that you are being asked to do this as a condition of your employment, right? It's not, and so you're made to do it. Is that it can't? What ends up happening is this. I'll explain, like, how does crunch actually function? It's usually, I think it's a lot of times it's like you work until about 8 or 10 p.m. It depends on when you get in the office or whatever. That's fairly typical when you're crunching. Yes, they'll provide you dinner, and they pay for that. So that's kind of okay. I mean, it's also eventually going to not be good for you, right? Because no one in crunch is getting the health options, at those restaurants. In the case of Irrational, and I remember we talked about this with Gwen Frey when she was on, because she was working there too. Notice how I always name drop our guests. I love the name drop our guests.
Every 2 seconds, you're plugging the podcast we're producing.
Right. Well, because it's important, because we have several years now of awesome material.
Yeah.
But
hey, I've actually name dropped Gwen's name in a conversation of, I know Gwen Frey. She was on my podcast.
That's right.
I interviewed her on my podcast. Oh, really? Yeah.
So anyway, like.
But anywho's,
Irrational had lunches too. They had crunch lunches and dinners. And like, there would always be lots of leftovers. So even if like you were just like hungry, the fridge was always like stuffed with like amazing Boston area food.
What do they get? Like lobsters and
they would get like meat pies. I remember one time they got incredible like meat pies from a place where one of them was like you could get like curry meat pie. So it's like a chicken pot pie but like curry inside. And they had like 100 different varieties of like, I mean, that was probably the best crunch meal there that they had.
Really?
That was super good, yeah. But what ends up happening and why it was my worst crunch experience is that it was really long. I think it started in maybe August, maybe even in July. I can't remember, of like 2012, and then it didn't end until like November, at least for me.
August, September, October, November.
Yeah, and here's what makes it kind of weird.
3-4 months.
Is, okay, like, it doesn't matter when you're crunching if you yourself don't actually need to crunch all the time, because they can't, especially in a large company, and actually I was working for Human Head that was hired to work for them, basically, so I was a contractor even. They can't just be like, well, this person doesn't crunch, but all you crunch. But this person's ahead on their task.
Oh, we didn't talk about the sympathy crunch. That's another good one. The sympathy crunch.
Well, that's kind of what it became like. Now, at first, when I started crunching, sure, I had lots of things to do, but especially in October or so. I think it really started in October and especially in November. And November was really bad, where it's like I'm just finding the most mundane, ridiculous bugs to fix, like bugs that really don't like D level bugs, right? And they had, like I mentioned, the person that like kept track of how many bugs they had like a bug.
There's always the person that keeps a set of bugs that they know they like if they have to cancel a few to get I got to cancel 5 more bugs and we could go home. They keep a little in the backlog just to
that's right. They launder them,
Yeah.
But Irrational had a bug. They had a bug fixing leaderboard that they would post up in their office. I think I did get in the top 5 at a few, but
Really?
It's really disingenuous because like remember my poor buddy Ryan Smith, who was an engineer. He'd take a week, a full week to fix a really complicated pathfinding AI bug that was like destroying the game, right? And yet it would be some artist Yahoo #1 on the list because they fixed like 1,000 shaders by clicking 2 times. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I always kind of felt bad for the programmers. They got jobbed on the bug fixing leaderboard. But yeah, it gets demoralizing when you're crunching and you want to be home with your family, but you don't really need to be crunching, but you have to.
Yeah,
right?
that's terrible. That's a terrible production.
Right. Yeah.
It's flawed from every angle. That's not a solvent business model, number one. But
right. Yep. And here's the funny thing too. Like that one, I actually did get paid. I did get paid overtime on that one because
you did?
I was a contractor.
What are you complaining about then?
Now here's the thing, though. Like, I think the statute of limitations is passed, and I can talk about this a little more freely than I would have in the past, especially because Human Head technically doesn't exist anymore. They're Roundhouse Games now, owned by ZeniMax.
Yeah.
So, like, how that happened was, I think it was because we were contractors. I think we just got probably in a weird spot because it's very uncommon to get paid overtime in the video game industry.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost unheard of. I think we got it because we were contractors. It was probably like Massachusetts labor law or something dictate. I have no idea. But here's the thing. I'm not complaining. This is not like a thing where I'm like, they did me wrong or anything like that. But the fact is, when we got BioShock Infinite, Human Head had just gone through the Prey 2 stuff. And, the cupboards were a little bare, Kip. Cupboards were bare, right? And so Human Head took most of that overtime pay for the company coffers. And we just got like a little bit. They gave us some of it, but they were very
Oh, really?
Look, yeah, they're like, look, they're paying y'all overtime, but we frankly need to be taking in as much money as we can. You're going to get some of it. You are going to get some of it, but we have to accept. Now again, look, like just to make it clear, it's not like they were like taking money out of my bank account. This is money that Irrational was paying them, and then they,
I guess we could probably get into this aspect. This is saucy where we're going here, right? Because this
I'm
is like
saying they did nothing wrong whatsoever. I just want to be clear. They did nothing wrong whatsoever. I ended up getting a few $1,000 out of it, and look, the cupboards were bare for me, so anything was better than nothing. And again, you usually get nothing. Like you usually get absolutely
you get nothing
for crunching,
nothing.
Right? So I was thankful for anything I got, and I was thankful that the company I was working for, who I dearly love, and I love all those guys. I was thankful that they were able to restore their company coffers, because then I would have a job when I got back, right? So that was the thing. So that made that crunch a little more bearable, but it was a tough one because it was for a long time, and again at the end there, it really was just you're pushing crates around, you're doing the most menial stuff just to fill the time. What's your next question, Kipperoo?
What's the best experience you've had crunching?
The best. Oh man, I have to think about that. That's a great question. I'm not going to count the personal crunching that we talked about at length before.
Yeah.
Because that would be the best if I would allow that, because you're excited and you're just there late because you want to be, and that would be Earth Defense Force. Insect Armageddon probably had the most voluntary crunching, and that was really just because I loved making that game. But as far as that I really enjoyed the experience that I had with you, at Cold Iron. We were getting ready to be sold to Fox. We had to,
that was a crunch.
We definitely had to crunch. Now, Cold Iron, as a company, they don't crunch very much at all, and that's something they're very good about. But in that circumstance, we did. But
luckily, they could see my face.
But no, they are good about that. They are legitimately good at that. They try real hard, on that front. But on that particular situation, they absolutely had to. And the funny
Yeah.
thing is, like, that I thought was a lot of fun because what I really liked about that is we were generating value really out of thin air, right? I mean, we were
Hell yeah, we were.
I mean, and that's thrilling, right? When you think about, like, you are taking ones and zeros on the computer and you're making a demo that eventually got us interest from a huge international company. I think that
saved everybody's. I mean, I'll say it right now. That saved everybody's bacon. That demo.
yeah,
And I think
yeah.
at that point, the company, that's where we were kind of like, hey, what's the super fun thing? Okay, let's go on that. Everybody was kind of jamming on that, and the energy was very good, and it was a very positive time. And I
It's
like that
rare.
type of thing. That was an exciting period.
It's
I
rare
was,
when all the things come together like that.
yeah,
Because we get with any project, every project we're on, including even projects at Purdue, there's always this balance that's hard to get between, like, you can get stuck in the mud planning, and planning's super important. I mean, you've heard us say this ad nauseum on this podcast, and people that are in my classes. I love good planning, but you can get stuck on that to the point where you don't
preparation,
do anything,
preparation.
to the point where you don't actually do anything, right? Where you get paralyzed. But then there's we've talked before about the game jam, right? If you're too disorganized, I think there's like a sweet spot in between where you're not letting the planning get in the way of doing things, but you're not.
Well, this is like you know what you want to make. Like you're like a chef or something, and you know the dish you want to make. Like, okay, we've got these ingredients. These ingredients go well together. We're gonna try to jam on this. Like what strings to pull, what things to do. You're not just like randomly throwing stuff at a wall, seeing what sticks. It's like there's variables that and I think at those desperate hours, you kind of know, you go with like the lowest hanging fruit and the biggest bang for the buck. So you do a lot with a little bit, and there's kind of like a magic thing. It's not a fun spot to be in personally. Like that was very, very stressful, but it was very rewarding, especially when it paid off and it was like, oh, okay, like the sigh of relief, and you could kind of release afterwards. But
you asked as far as good overtime experiences. The other one that just popped in my head was Prey 2, because Prey 2 was mega crunch, like right until all the stuff happened, it was crunchy. I got there, I arrived at Human Head, it was like the end of February 2011, and things were just sort of fine and normal. And then we got into the summer, and I think it was near the end of summer we started crunching, and it was, on the one hand, it was pretty brutal and high pressure, but we were just doing lots of great stuff, and the game was looking awesome. It was, I remember one of the last things I did on Prey 2, the very last things I did before all that stuff went away, is I was doing the introductory tutorial levels. When you start playing a game and there's like a thing that pops up that goes, hey, this is the button you press to shoot. This is the button you press to go into cover. I was doing all that stuff. I was like orchestrating the beginning of the game. Like that was awesome. Like putting together like the very first seconds that a player experiences is really neat. And so that was positive too, even though we were crunching, like we were just, in sort of in harmony, right? I would say Lost Within Crunch was fine. I think that went well. It was also like less severe. Like Human Head had gotten a lot better at that point. And I'm trying to think. I think that about sums it up. Did you have a third question, Kip?
Yeah. So the third question is, now, since you're, how can I put this? Since you have a family, you have obligations outside of the normal, game dev world, maybe like obligations. How has that positively affected your work? Like, how is that? Have you found yourself more productive and less into the crunch scenario? This is a very leading question.
Right.
I wanted this to be not so.
No. I think I know where you're getting
to be like,
at.
yeah, actually, now that I've got a family and a bunch of kids,
I'm gonna answer that in two parts.
Okay.
The first part is that I'm weird in that I had a family before I even got into the game industry.
Yeah, so you never experienced like that, you know.
And I will say that's a really valuable and fun thing I missed out on. So to all of you young bucks out there that are, single in the games industry in your early to mid 20s, treasure those times, because I blew my early to mid 20s being a starving jazz musician. Right? So that's how I spent that time in my life. So so I never had that perspective. I kind of always had the family. The other part is that, my family has been really uncommonly good and supportive about that. There's never really been any time where they're like, in any of the crunches I've had, where they're like, "You're gone too much." I mean, they're happy when I'm not crunching, but they're always really supportive. I remember, for instance, when this isn't crunching, but when I had told my wife I was going to work on BioShock, I had to tell her, "Well, I'm also going to be living in Boston, because we're living in Madison, Wisconsin. Like, I'm going to have to go live in an apartment that 2K Games is going to pay for, and I'm going to, live in this place, and I'm not even your husband's not even going to be home." And there was like a once a month visit they allowed, right? So I would visit once a month, and I did have them come out. I did fly them out a few times to spend a few weeks. But again, it was just like, I thought they would just be like, "Oh my God, you can't do this." Instead, it was like, "That sounds awesome. You should do that." Like, so my wife's been incredibly supportive throughout on those things. But to get at what I think you're getting at with your question, because this has always been my experience. Even when I went to Guildhall to go to school, I had a 2-month-old. My 12-year-old daughter was 2 months old when I started graduate school. Having those additional responsibilities does not actually mean that you are distracted and do not do your job well, because you have, on the opposite, it makes you desperate, because you have these responsibilities, you have these people that you have to support that depend on you, and you are, in my opinion, way more effective. Actually, you make a lot better use of your time. You screw around less. You're more responsible. You focus harder.
That's the answer I wanted to hear.
Yeah. Well, I knew that's what you're getting at, but it is 100% true. And there's an old saying that kind of ties into this, which is, if you want something done, ask a busy person. And that's so true, because, like, look, thinking about my summer break, a great example of this, probably from May 15th, which is when this semester was basically over for me, probably until that first month of my summer break. I have about a month left now. I have about 5 weeks of it left or something. So the first.
That's when school starts again?
Yeah, in about 5 weeks or so.
Oh my God.
And I know, crazy, and it'll be even crazier with the pandemic and all that. I have an awesome new mask to wear at Purdue, an amazing mask. It's actually, it's my
Purdue
face.
Pete on it?
No, it's actually a picture of my face on the mask.
Oh, really?
Yes, it's incredible. But anyway, that first month of summer, it's like I have all the time in the world, and I'm trying to be productive. I'm doing things, but it's just amazing when you have a lot of time. You just use it crappily, right? You're just not efficient. And now that, I just moved into a house and I got all this IKEA furniture to build, and now I have a Purdue summer project that takes a good part of my day, and then all of a sudden I'm doing more, but I'm more productive, right? I'm getting more done, because when you actually have responsibilities and tasks and everything, it just puts you in a work mode, right? And I think that's related to kind of what you're talking about. If you are someone in the video game industry that's a bit older with family and everything, you're more serious about what you're doing for the 8 hours that you're supposed to be there, versus look, you can be there 15 hours, but do 6 hours of work or less. That happens. That's easy to do, right? Yeah. Believe me, I can absolutely do 6 hours of work and spread it out in 15 hours. That's not hard. So absolutely, it's been, I think, a benefit to have those additional responsibilities. Kip, did you want to answer those questions, or were those questions just for me?
I could answer them. Do you want me to answer them?
Yeah. What's your worst crunch experience, Kip Carbone?
The worst crunch experience would be on Recore.
Oh,
by far. I
So
think that
that's
was probably the worst.
relatively recent-ish, like 4 years
Yeah,
ago
I still
maybe.
remember
So
all that stuff. It was terrible. All right, so we'll get into the juicy stuff. Number one, they turned off the air conditioning at like 7 o'clock at night, and so
oh
we're
my gosh.
this is in Texas, and it's like in the summer, and it's like 110 degrees or something. So it's awful, and they're like, "Oh, the building turns it off. We'd have no control over that. Sorry." And then like the cleaning crew would come in at like 9, and they would have all the lights on, so it looked like Walmart lighting, and they're all vacuuming and like bumping over stuff, and it's all awful. That was sort of one of the death crunches where it's like hey everybody, come into this room. It's like the Bataan Death March. We're all gonna die.
You got some good dinners though, right? You probably got some sweet dinners. Maybe some
No, no.
chipotle.
So okay, so this goes. So eventually it's just like the weekly crunch. Monday to Friday, and then we get the second meeting of like, guess what? We get to crunch even more
It's
on
like
the weekends.
I'm
We're
gonna
working
have to go ahead
weekends.
and ask you to come in on Saturday to talk like
Yeah.
Lumberg from Office Space.
Oh. So then, because at this point we're not making any money, the studio, and like it's getting tight, and like they have like business wise, this was not the smartest move. I mean, this was a weird game. So anyway, so they buy sandwiches. Well, they get cold cuts and bread, and they're like, okay, go. It's 12 o'clock. You could go make yourself a sandwich in the
Oh
break
my
room
gosh!
on a Saturday. So we go there, and then
Here's some bologna and some Wonder Bread. That's amazing.
no, 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 no. So it gets better. So they don't buy enough bread. So I show up a little bit late. I don't get any bread on my sandwich. That's okay. It was before I went keto. So yeah, that was a fun period.
You're making my crunch stories seem absolutely like I was in the and in a way I was right because like on Bioshock it was like they spared no expense on everything. I mean they had the masseuse
Yeah.
out there, the awesome
What?
meals. Oh yes, there was a. I
No.
don't think the contractors did not get the masseuse. I think that was for the proper
Oh,
rational employees. But anyway, keep going.
okay. Well, yeah, like there's a lot of other stuff too of like visibility. I think at that time I would go home at like I had to pick up my child. He was like maybe he was a year old, I think, at that point. So we had to pick him up at daycare and then get him settled, and then at night I would come back after he had gone to bed, which he like didn't sleep the first 2 years. So I would come back and work until like 2. So I would go there from like 7 or 8 until 2. But everybody had basically everybody had gone to they kind of stay for the long enough to get the OT dinner and then
Right.
belt
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
of there, right? Because you have to stay to a certain amount of time so you could get free dinner.
Right.
So
Right.
you show up at like 10:30, work until 7:30, and then get your OT dinner because you're technically working overtime, and then eat it and beat it,
That
and
is
then you're out of
some
there.
weak sauce crunching, by the way. That is like
Yeah.
the whole 10:30 to 7:30 eat OT dinner and
And of course,
leave.
there's always meetings of like, oh, if you eat dinner, you got to stay an extra 2 hours because that $5 meal we bought you is worth 2 hours of your life, right? Here's another funny one. Okay, I won't mention where this came from, but there was a very we had crunched a little bit, not bad, but a little bit. Okay, this is another project, another company, something. And so they always said like we always had like the weekly rotation of like dinners, right? Oh, pick whatever you want on, and they're very good about like, oh, I want to get the steak, no big deal. There wasn't like keep it under $10 or something, right? For OT dinners, you want to get an appetizer, no problem. You want to get a dessert, no problem. Really good. Pick whatever you want. So one night, this like prominent restaurant comes up on there. It's like a Thursday night. Everybody stays for OT. Everybody orders the steak. Everybody gets the appetizer. Everybody gets the dessert. So we're all working there, plugging away, and it's kind of like, yeah, okay, everybody's there, right? It's 6 o'clock rolls around. Dinner's been delayed a little bit. Okay, wait a little bit. 7:30 comes around. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong. They just didn't show up. 8:30 shows up. Oh, we actually got pizza for everybody. Because they knew everybody, they blew the bank account on all this food, and it was just like
That's always, by the way, very demoralizing in overtime when the overtime dinners become just pizza constantly because that's like the easiest thing to
yeah.
feed like a mass amount of people cheaply. It's funny though when you're a college kid. I'll say this, like in teaching at Purdue, whenever we need to get students to show up to something after 6 p.m. that's like not a class they have to be at or whatever, we just get the department to spring for pizza, and that works every time because when you're a college kid, that's like awesome, right? But when you're like 28 years old, when you're like a grown ass adult,
when your metabolism goes to hell and then you can't eat pizza.
That's the problem too.
Hours.
It's like part of it is pizza.
This is gonna kill me. This isn't funny.
Pizza, even if it's like the best pizza in the world, like we're both low carbers, okay? Pizza makes me feel like crap. Like, so if I eat pizza, I am not productive after that. Like, I'm just like,
get me a prime rib and some espresso, and we'll get this game done.
That's right. Heck yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's funny though. I have to say, like, my crunch experiences, they never got quite as ridiculously low rent, thank goodness. Like, even with Human Head Prey 2, because things were, getting a little weird there at the end. It didn't quite hit that. There was sort of this...
There's a lot of other weirdo stuff I could talk about if that's what the viewers want to hear about in the games industry.
What's your weirdest crunch experience?
The weirdest crunch experience?
Yeah, weirdest.
Like how? Like where do you want to go with weird? Like where do you want to
Well, like just how you were treated, like what was happening, like what times you had to go in, anything, like anything at all.
Like abuse?
Yeah, sure, abuse. That's fine.
Okay, because like they're saying we could. Somebody was actually going to pay me to go on a. They were providing a service for people to talk to devs. Of like, hey, we want you to tell your war stories and like, tell us about these. So like that's I didn't want to do it because we were starting this podcast and I want to get them out for the public to know. So we're like weird, abusive stories in dev that won't get me too much in trouble.
That's always the key, right?
I can't. It's terrible. I'm blanking on this of like what was like a real bad.
Well, what about like I know this because our friends over at Region Free Gamers where I guested on their podcast, they recently did one on Splatterhouse, on the whole Splatterhouse series, and they talked about the Splatterhouse game you worked on. That had to have been weird, right? Because you had Bottle Rocket that kind of went away, but they finished the game, and so did anything?
It like reformed. Basically, it reformed in the ashes of Bottle Rocket, and well, I guess at that time, yeah, like I had. This is a good story. This is a good story. Take a knee. This is a good one. So like. I had gotten. This was like right when I was towards the end of that. Like I guess I don't know where this fell in the production of it, but we were far behind in production, to say the long story short. And then I had put in. I was like, hey, I'm getting married. This was like 6 months in advance. Like I'm like so excited. I'm getting married. I'm going. We're flying to. Taking it. Honeymoon 2 weeks.
If I was a jerk, I'd say to. The name of your wife because I know her, but I'm not going to be a jerk. I'm not going to make that joke. I assume it married to the person I know.
Yes, same wife.
But anyway, proceed.
And then so then like we're like this is like a death march, like a Bataan death march. And it's like me. I mean, like, I'd been crunching a lot at this company. This was sort of like when I was still young, and I was there till like 2 every morning, and then I'd go home for a couple hours and sleep. I was just killing myself, and like nobody else was crunching really. There's one other guy, good guy, Errol, my buddy. He was crunching. A couple other guys, I'll do a shout out to Sean and Mo, the tech guys, tech artists. They were crunching. Good people. Dano was probably not mentioning other people. Don't be afraid. Don't be mad if I didn't mention your name and you were like, I was crunching too with you, asshole. But anyway, so all of a sudden, there's like this, like I'm like, hey, so I'm gonna like Friday get married. I'm out of here for 2 weeks. And like they made this big stink of like, no, you can't go. This is ridiculous. This is outrageous. You got to stay here and you got to be like working. And I'm like, well, actually, you approved this PTO and blah blah blah, and like here's the email, and like you said it's okay. You never like, and so then they made this like huge hubbub of like, like you're gonna be, then like they finally were like, all right, you'll be fine. Oh, like literally within like 30 minutes, they're like, guess what? Namco's going to be here. They need a build. Can you get us a build right away? And this is like at like, I don't know, 10:30 in the morning or something. And that whole morning, it was just like chaos of just like people yelling at me and, like the HR person coming in and like, you're in big trouble. And I'm like, no, I'm not actually, because I put in PTO. And then anyway, so we get this build. And then by like 11:15, they have the big company meeting. Guess what? We're closing down. So it was like this morning from like, what's going on? And then like, it was just like, man, this is crazy. I'm kind of glad this is over with, sort of. But yeah, it was a big debacle. Pretty fun. It's funny now looking at it. I guess
it wouldn't have been funny to experience it like at the time.
It was funny to experience it. I thought it was funny.
That's a fantastic story. Like, wow.
Yeah, but it was just like, it was not. It was the speed at which all this stuff happened and people's emotions like were just like,
right.
And then it was just like.
Well, and that's the thing
out.
too. Like people don't understand, especially the younger listeners that haven't like worked like kind of salary jobs where you have PTO or whatever. I mean, when you ask for time off, it has to get approved like in advance, right? It's not like you just announced, "Hey, I'm getting married. I'm gone for 2 weeks." No, you sent in for that PTO. It got approved by your manager.
That's pretty standard by most companies and stuff. I'm sure if you were going to take a big. I think there's certainly with like knowing that there's like a production time of like, okay, this is going to be like, say the summer, it's going to get hot. You're going to be working a lot. That's usually not sadly, that's usually when, people take vacations, but that's kind of, you're going to throw a wrench into production if you take off. Most of the time people are not cool about it.
My philosophy on that has always been like, when I started in the industry, I think someone even told me that like, well, Rob, you have to be like really careful when you take PTO. You have to look at the schedule and you have to make sure that it's not like at a really bad time, And what I learned is that if you actually have that attitude, what'll happen is you never take PTO and you never take time off, because guess what, fellas? There's never a good time to take PTO on a project. If you're a successful studio actually working on things, there'll never be a time when they just tell you, "Hey, guess what? The PTO." And by the way, the other thing I want my younger listeners to understand is this is not me being like a jerk or mercenary or anything. PTO is part of your compensation package. That's time you earn. They have to pay you for it if you leave the company and you have unused PTO. It is compensation. It is part of...
Oh, wait, we could talk about that too.
Yeah. So I'll let you talk about that. It's my point.
Okay.
Taking PTO is not evil or bad or screwing the company over. Yes, they can deny it, and it is their right to deny it. You have
take
to get
that
approval.
PTO, otherwise they're going to take it from you.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to take your time off. That is part of your compensation package. You are earning that every pay cycle. A certain amount of PTO hours gets earned, and you're foolish not. And a good company will encourage you to take it. And a lot of the companies that I've worked for do encourage you to take it. But anyway, Kip, you were going to say something.
So then that was another thing where I had accrued like. Like a lot of PTO, and everybody did, and so nobody got PTO as well because they couldn't pay that out, which is technically illegal by the state of California to not pay that out.
They are in debt to you in that way. Yeah.
And then also like we had PTO where you'd accrue it, right, or you'd get like days off, and then at Armature, and then they switched it. So then they would. Depending upon how long you had been at the company, you could accrue it at a faster rate. So I had been there for a very long time. So like I accrued it at a higher rate, right? And so I had a lot of PTO. And then they went to infinite PTO, which meant there's no PTO.
Yeah,
because they still have to approve it.
Yes, this is great. This is a little off topic from Crunch a little bit, but I think it's okay because it's
Eh,
good.
it's all tied in. If people want to hear these saucy stories in the
Ah.
industry,
Well, how about this? We'll
we're not.
cover because we've been going for about 70 minutes now. Believe it or not, I think we'll cover this and then we'll go into the last brief topic, which is kind of how we both personally feel about Crunch in the industry, what our opinions.
I didn't
are.
answer those two other questions.
Oh, you didn't? Well, we'll have to do that as well. So let me just
Okay.
say real quick. My personal opinion is that unlimited PTO, at least at most companies, is one of the biggest scams going.
Yeah.
And I don't like the practice because what ends up happening is that, like, I'm a rules follower, right, by nature. I like knowing where boundaries are and staying well within the boundaries. It is not in my nature to be like, hey, the boundary is here. I'm going to be right here on the line and test your patience with me. No, I want to be right here in a nice, comfortable spot, right? And when you when you get, let's say, 3 weeks of PTO, which is actually pretty common, video game industry is very good about that. That's usually common.
That's
to get
good.
3 weeks.
Yeah.
It might be 2 in some places, especially if you're junior, but it's not uncommon for it to be 3 weeks. You know it's 3 weeks. You know that, look, no one can get mad at you if you're getting PTO approved. No one's going to guilt trip you for taking 90% of that 3 weeks every year, or even 100% of the 3 weeks every year, right? But when you have unlimited PTO, what it means is there's going to come a time when your manager gets a little annoyed at you for taking it, but it's an indeterminate amount. Like, you don't know, are they going to get annoyed at you if you take 2 weeks, 2.5, 1? What if you take 4? I don't know. I don't know. And honestly, I don't like that. And I will say, in my experience of unlimited PTO, I have gotten pressured once I crossed a certain threshold. And what I always think when I cross that threshold is, okay, well, that's how much PTO I'm actually getting, right? If you're starting to say, you're not going to take any more the rest of the year, right? That's what you'll be told, right? You'll be told that. So once your manager says that to you, that's how much PTO you really have, and it's not really unlimited, right? So if it's at 2.5 weeks, then, well, yeah, it's 2.5 weeks. It's not unlimited. So anyway, that's my opinion on unlimited PTO. I think it's probably at most companies a ridiculous practice, and as good as it sounds, I don't like it. So Kip, answer those other questions.
Okay. Best. I would say definitely when we were jamming on that demo, that was good. That was rough, but it was good. That was like a good rhythm. Probably the other one was also, I guess it would be also on Recore, but when I was working with this other dude, Dylan Job, who he came to work at Armature for a period. He was the founder of a studio in Austin. I can't remember the name of it. They made that Warhawk game.
Yeah, I know what you mean. That was a Sony studio.
That's terrible. Yeah, I forgot the name of it. Lightbox. That's it. Yeah. Lightbox. Mind-blowing experience to work with somebody of that caliber, and that sort of opened my mind to a lot of different things. And it was like a very rewarding. It was very. But I guess you could kind of see how that was that same type of energy or whatever. But him kind of driving it, and me kind of more of the apprentice, not an apprentice at that time, but I was like, the Padawan. That was not the Padawan, but yeah, anyway. good working relationship with that, like we had. Right. And then yes, the more responsibility you have in your life, the more you do everything better. The more structure and the more balance you have, the better everything is. So in that regard, so once having a family and whatnot, my focus is laser, and I don't screw around at all when I'm working. And the amount I can get done is, which I've kind of seen this anyway with just other happenstance of not the amount of time doesn't necessarily matter so much as the amount of work you can do and how focused you are, and managing that, and with having other obligations like children, a significant other, whatever, it definitely improves that.
And for me, I think really when I was in grad school was when that manifested the most, because I was definitely not the most talented or most knowledgeable student in my class, but I had a 2-month-old child and a wife, and who decided to sever all income and go to Texas to go into massive debt so I can fulfill this childlike dream.
You can go to hell. I'll go to Texas. That's
right.
what Davy Crockett said.
That's right. And so I knew I absolutely had no choice but to make it work. It was much like, if you remember the old movie Hunt for Red October, when like Ramius, the admiral, the Russian, or not the admiral, the ship captain, the submarine captain, the Sean Connery character, when he sends a letter to the Soviet premier, basically saying, "Yeah, I've stolen your sub, and I'm going to defect to America with it." Ha ha, right? His CO asks him, "Why in the world did you do that? Like, why did you send this letter announcing your intention to the government, so that they're going to send, like severing your ties? There's no going back." And he said, I'm going to do a crappy Sean Connery imitation, like, When Cortez landed in the New World, he burned his ships so his men could be motivated, and that's what it was like for me when I was in school with a wife and child, because I knew that I had to make this work. It would be a horrible, horrible disaster for my family.
Playing for keeps.
If I did this and failed, either I didn't get the degree or I got the degree and didn't get a job.
You're racing for pinks.
But then we were in like huge student debt and I couldn't even like get a job in that field. Right. I mean, it would have been just catastrophically bad for me.
Yeah.
Like, right. And so I had no option. So that motivated me. Every school break we had, I was working on the portfolio, like every chance I got. So I was definitely not the best, but I probably outworked a lot of folks I was in school with just from being motivated and all that. And that helped. I mean, and that gave me good work habits. And actually, I mentioned this before, so I don't forget, finishing moves, because this has to do with, crunch as well, right? Like, this was something I learned from Gary Brubaker, who now is the director of the school I went to, Guildhall. He was an old LucasArts guy. I've probably brought him up before at another podcast, but he used to talk about this notion of finishing moves, which was basically like, do you have what it takes to dig in and find that extra gear to get whatever it is done when it needs to be done, right? Or are you always just going to be that person, be like, well, I can't get it done today, it's going to have to happen tomorrow, right? That's the finishing move, right? Sometimes you have to have that. Sometimes, and this is going to lead into my opinion on crunch, my ultimate opinion on crunch. There are times when it's not good enough to say, I'm going to do this tomorrow or next week, or I'm going to sleep on it or whatever. Occasionally, you have to find another gear that you didn't know you had and punch it, right? And that's finishing moves, right? And if you're a student, you know what I'm talking about, because this is, you have a project that's due and you're running out of time and you're tired and you don't want to put that second pot of coffee on to pull the all-nighter, but you want to do a good job and get it done. Your choices are either to do a bad job and get a crappy grade, or to suffer for one night, push through, get the thing done, and done well. That's finishing moves. Not everyone has that, right? And
no. I mean, I think it's a rarity these days as well. I think
it is.
And I want to make a distinction between the finishing move and then needless toil.
Yes, that's
because
right.
there's two different things, right? There's just like, you're just punishing yourself for no purpose whatsoever, and then you're actually, this is sort of like I call these the killer instincts, right? Like it is the finishing move, right? Like, you got to be able to go in for the kill, and you got to see that in all aspects of life. And this is the same stuff that, like, I don't know, like every David Goggin video is talking about, like, you don't know me, son. It's just like, just push through it, right? I mean, it's like the suck, right? It just sucks, but you just got to push through it. And how you know it's working is because if it sucks, and if you're going through it, then like, okay, you just got to go through it.
Right.
I think there's better ways to go through. I think you learn there's better ways to get through that, right? And it doesn't always have to be just brute force. And sometimes, I guess a lot of the things that I've specialized in is not making brute force the way to do it.
Right.
And you could figure out other methods, but
developing methods and processes that, to the best that you can, avoid ending up having to be in that second gear. Right. And that's, of course, incredibly valuable and good. So I think at this point we should transition to the last thing, and that's crunch culture in the video game industry and how that has changed. Now the
Yeah.
attitude on crunch has changed, and what our attitude personally is on it, right? So when I started and when you started, Kip, crunch
Hmm.
was viewed mildly negatively, but there was also a macho thing. Absolutely. It was like, hey, like, I'm better than you because I can be here for 15 hours, and, I'm better than you because I can grind at this stuff longer and better. And that was viewed as like a very macho thing, a very sort of, that was definitely in game dev culture, and it was definitely a negative thing, right? Like, and there was this attitude of crunch is how you get an awesome game, and it was just accepted, and it was even the way, I doubt it's like this now, but even when I was in school, the idea, one of the kind of things that my school was built on at that time, I'm sure it's changed now, but it's, we're going to crunch you so hard as a student that you'll be ready for the industry crunch. So we're going to train you by crunching you, by burning you out almost, so
That's
that
not bad.
when you
That's what
get,
happened to me at school. Yeah, for
and so
sure.
that way when you get into the industry, even when they are crunching, it's like a vacation. And let me
Yeah,
tell
I think
you,
that's fine. That's absolutely fine, especially when you're young, right?
let
You
me
could
tell
burn.
you, it worked.
Yeah.
I will tell
Yeah.
you, it worked. I have to this day never done anything as difficult as getting that master's
Yeah.
degree at Guildhall. Now, there's other factors that were extenuating. It was supposed to really be a 24-month program, and it was 17 for my class because there are various things that made it really hard on my group in particular. But like, gosh, I remember like learning that I had to delay my thesis defense because I misread an email or something, and I just like broke down and cried in front of everyone, right? Just because just the state. I remember my parents
There's no
came.
crying in game dev.
I remember my parents came to like because for the graduation ceremony, and like someone made a remark about their backseat driving, and I just went nuts. I just slammed my hands on the steering wheel. You let me drive, and this was all the stress that was building up. Right, it was just like this enormous at the last 7 months was like I would get up and work until I dropped at like 4 or 5 a.m., sleep a little bit, get back up again. 2-month-old daughter with sleep apnea that had to get surgery for it, right? Like,
Having children at that point is ludicrous.
there's a
That's
famous
crazy.
picture of me at Guildhall
Uh,
where it's called Guildhall Hard Mode, and it's a picture of me passed out with my 2-month-old, probably 3-month-old by this time, daughter,
uh,
like in my arms. I'm just like passed out, like on the couch,
yeah.
right? So yeah, early in the early days, as recently as maybe 7 years ago, 6-7 years ago, crunch was sort of like only mildly looked at negatively. It's just sort of like, yeah, we're in this, baby, we're just rocking this thing, right? We're
Hmm.
there's been a huge cultural shift to where now, and really I noticed it, I think, when Red Dead Redemption 2 came out, and I think it was Sam Hauser at Rockstar made, I think it was him, one of the Hausers, one of those folks up there at the upper echelons made this comment, oh yeah, we're crunching like crazy to get this, we're just going nuts, like we're here for 15 hours getting you this awesome game. And that would have been covered positively 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That would have been like, all the gaming blogs and stuff would have been like, oh man, I can't wait for Red Dead Redemption 2. Look at that. They're sleeping, and they have sleeping bags next to their desks. Look at that dedication.
They do
Actually,
crunch a lot there, though. I
they
mean, they crunch
do.
a
But
lot,
the
and it's
point
like the
is,
whole. Yeah,
that would
they
have been
work hard.
covered positively before, and
Yeah.
it was covered negatively when
Yeah.
that happened a few years ago. And that really signaled to me a huge sea change in the attitude about crunch, where instead of like, well, it's kind of not good, but it's actually kind of awesome, like to,
Hmm.
it's the worst thing in the world, it's the worst, can't do it. And obviously some companies are abusive with it still to this day, no
Yeah.
question. It's definitely not like, crunch is a failure in planning on some level on someone's part, right? Even if it's not the developer or publisher's fault or whatever, it's a failure on some level, right? Because the goal is to get the game done on time without killing yourself. That's always the goal. But man, things have gotten real negative on crunch
This is the
now.
way my face looked before I went into Recore.
Right.
Now it looks like a droopy dog now.
Well, my hair looked like Kip's hair. No, just kidding. Unfortunately,
Ah,
that
your
is.
hair never looked as good as this hair.
You're
Don't even.
right. You're dead right. No, my hair looks like that due to the genetics
I like
I
the
got from my
audience to
father.
know I've been on Rogaine for the past full quarantine, and we're starting to get back some real estate. So
Yeah.
it's good. Anyway.
Have you really been on Rogaine?
Yeah, yeah.
I never would have guessed in a million years that you would need it.
I
Like,
started it. Yeah, it started to go thin in this region,
oh, I
so I
hate you
just
so much. I would kill for your pre-Rogaine hair, Kip. Kill.
pre-Rogaine.
Like
You could do it. It works in the front. It works in the back. Like there's been no medical study to prove that it works in the front, but whatever you put it on, it'll grow hair.
interesting.
Put it on your nose, it'll grow hair.
Maybe I'll give it a shot. We'll talk offline. I was
Okay.
about to get into details, like, oh, Kip, but anyway, yeah, like, the attitude towards crunch has changed radically, and I think that's mostly quite good. Obviously I like the fact that companies are now going to be pressured by the game's media to not crunch. You're going to be covered negatively because of it. Because that statement that the Rockstar fellow made about Red Dead 2, he made it in that way that when you say, like, for instance, if I were to tell you, like, oh, Kip, I've been working on this music album and I've just slaved away on it 20 hours a day, you usually say something like that to get like people to pump you up. You're like, yeah, man, that's great. You're really working hard, and that's kind of what he was doing, and it was just covered. So that's a big sea change, and
Yeah.
and maybe
There was some stuff of like during the pandemic, particular
right, yeah.
of like studios like, oh, they're even allowing them to go home to work, or something like
Yeah, so,
due to the COVID-19. So yeah, I mean that. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of like the studio culture is like deems that like the norm, and that's not. Yeah, I mean, I like it. Yeah, there is certainly like you got to bleed for the good product a little bit, right? It's not like
yes,
super easy.
that's what I'm getting at. Like, I think the pendulum has shifted so far on
Yeah.
the other end that there are definitely people in the industry right now where it's like, if they work more than 1 minute past 8 hours, it's like they act like you've punched them in the face, right? And
Yeah, and like I mean, I don't think they've seen some of the stuff that like I don't know somebody who is more of a vet who's seen a lot of stuff and is
they weren't making bologna sandwiches without bread, I tell you that.
I mean, it reminds me of like that Metallica thing where it's like the hand sandwich where you're just like put the meat on the hand and you eat it. That's your sandwich, like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that was a bad one. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I've got a lot of bad stories of just like getting kicked in the
But
groin.
here's the thing, like, I'm happy.
It just makes me harder, Rob. It doesn't make me. It's not gonna break me.
I'm happy that crunch isn't glorified like it used to be. That said, I do think there is a bit of wisdom here that sometimes, due to no one's fault, game development is unpredictable and difficult. Things get off the rails, especially if the project has any kind of artistic or technical complexity. Things can get off the rails, and sometimes you just have to get stuff done, and it's not going to happen from 9 to 5. And I think some measure of that is, I'm not even going to say it's good or bad, like I'm making a value judgment on it. I'm just going to say it's inevitable. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
Right? Unless you delay the product permanently. And that is not life. That is not how life works. You don't get to just kick the can down the road permanently. Sometimes you have a fixed date and you have to get the thing done, and you have to go beyond. We just have to limit it as much as we can. But it's not like, this is not. We also have to be realistic about the type of work we're doing. Yes, like when I was crunching a BioShock for all those months, does it start to wear on you? Does it start to affect your health negatively? Yeah, of course. But is it like, it's not coal mining though? It's not. You're not breathing in noxious fumes. It's not.
That's what I was born to do, Rob. Was coal mine.
Yeah, with the little hat and the little canary and all that, and
my last name is Cole after all. So
that's right. But
Charcoal.
what I'm saying though, it's like we are in a pretty privileged career where we sit at a desk, and I'm not saying it isn't taxing.
this isn't like, I mean, there's people with jobs that are like dangerous, like
Right.
I mean, you're like I don't know, a demolitions expert or something for the SWAT team or something, and you're like, what wire do I cut, or like just I don't know, or like I don't know, there's like serious job, or like I don't know, you're like some brain surgeon or something, you're like saving lives, and it's like down to the wire and who knows what, but.
So I guess that makes me a crunch. I don't know if centrist is the right word, but like not a hardcore like crunch can never ever ever happen. Like
It's an effective tool when used correctly.
yeah, yeah, and it's always and here's the thing when it's I'll go back to Lost Within. I reference that project a lot because I think even though it's a game most people don't know about in my career, it did a lot of things right. And yeah, like there was crunch the last couple of months, but they did it right in a number of ways. They never
They had
actually named it. Yeah, they had air conditioning. And they had bread for the bologna sandwiches. No, just kidding. It was never mandatory. It was basically like, look, you know what your task list is. Some of you know that you have more than you can do in 8 hours, and we will buy you dinner if you stay here and you tell us. And but if you don't have enough work to be here, don't do that, right? And we're going to trust you to judge that for yourself. In other words, we are treated like adults. And so there are times when I would come in and get the overtime dinner and work until 8, 9, 10 o'clock, whatever it was, because I knew I needed that. But then guess what? A lot of times the next day it'd be like, I'm okay for now. It also, when companies do it like that, when they make it sort of voluntary, it allows you to pace yourself. It means like maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're crunching hard. But you know what? You're spent now. I'm just going to spend the regular 8 hours, have a normal weekend.
You gotta, whatever you take out of the tank, you gotta put back in. So
yep, exactly. Yeah,
you gotta restore your chi. Otherwise, it's just no good.
And they also were I think really good about like making it cyclical too, where they'd be like, look, this week no one's crunching this week.
Yeah.
Right. No one is, right. Like, and I think every couple of weeks they would do that, be like, hey, like we're done. With this and all that. So, I think, when done well, it's never the thing you want to happen, but there are ways to make it humane and relatively painless, and it is, look, when you have deadlines, there is a reality and you can't escape it completely, unless, and look, the reason why Nintendo can have the attitude they have is they have like $800 million in cash reserves or something. Like, they have they can just delay things forever because they have, lots of cash, and that is not the case for.
They emphatically planned things pretty well, I think.
Yeah, they do.
And
yeah.
Their quality control is the best of any video game studio I've ever worked at, where the product you put out, like from a bug standpoint and from a fun standpoint, is like, I've never seen anything like that before. That was sort of like my first foray into it, and like it's just, I thought, oh, this is how it all gets. Like, no, it's definitely far above anything I've seen.
All right, well, we've gone on now. I think we're at like
we're rambling. This is our longest
cast.
We're
at like an hour and 30 minutes or so. And look, I knew this would be a juicy one, right? Because this is very controversial. A lot of people that it's still like there's still a lot of debate about it or whatever. So I hope that you out there listening or watching this, you got something cool, maybe some funny stories, but maybe just some ideas about crunch, or maybe we broke some myths about crunch, that like kind of how it happens and why, right? Like that it's not just shoving cool stuff in the game. I hope you got something out of it. So I would say we got about 1 or 2 more episodes in game dev from soup to nuts. I think 1 or 2 more maybe.
Are we at the nuts yet?
Yeah, we're getting.
Because I'm going nuts.
We're real close to some Valencia peanuts that you get at you get at Costco, Kirkland brand, to make peanut butter. Yeah, we're really close. All right, Kip. So I think we're going to close this out now. So stay on the grid
and keep well hid.